You've made me very nervous now. I hope I can keep your respect, and I am actually going to focus mostly on red meat here as well. I always like it when I get to do a talk about the future because you can't be wrong. I'm just going to give my opinion on what I think is going to happen. I also had a video about supermarkets of the future, so I'm going to miss that one because what Carlo and Michelle have talked about already, I completely agree with them, and my video was really just going to replicate what they've already talked about. The title of my talk is Industry Programs that Underpin the Supermarket of the Future and Consumers' Want of Industry Data. So I am really going to focus more towards the end of this talk on industry programs, and specifically red meat industry and MLA and Integrity Systems Company, and their responsibility. And I'm going to talk about industry leadership around data systems and data platforms, and how that really connects with the whole consumer experience and consumer story that we've talked about so far, that we've heard about so far. So I will skip over that one and go straight to the next one. So what everyone's been talking about so far in the supermarket of the future is that customer-centric focus. Now, a lot of people think already that supermarkets are customer-centric focus, but really historically they're a product-centric focus. Supermarkets are constructed around products, where they go, when you walk past them, where you see them. The supermarkets of the future and all purchasing of food, not just in bricks and mortar supermarkets, but online, in restaurants, wherever you're going to experience or make a purchase decision, is going to be completely customer-centric. And a lot of the way that food will be sold in that customer-centric way is going to be connecting through emotion. Emotional stories, the whole social license bit. Beyond that, just connecting with a story that sells a particular piece of food. So, in Carlo's video we saw of the supermarkets of the future, things like, in-house or in-supermarket restaurants and eating areas where you sit down and eat a meal and then click a screen to buy all the ingredients to make it yourself because you've enjoyed the meal and that sort of thing. And it's not just the future, it's already happening. So have any of you seen this app, Cluck AR? It's an augmented reality app that gives you information about free-range eggs. So I recorded this just the other day in a supermarket. You basically film a packet of eggs with your phone, it scans the eggs and gives you information about the true free-range status. Because as we're all aware, and we've seen lots of media about it, free range doesn't necessarily mean free range. And you can see the very emotive language up the top, yeah, but no, that sort of thing. And then a rating down the bottom. And the whole thing is about because that's just data that's already on the packet. All that data is actually written on the packet in terms of stocking densities and things. But it's just turning that data into an emotional story about why you might or might not buy those eggs. So, it's not too hard to imagine at all the products that sort of concept can be extended to. And certainly meat, very easy to imagine how you'd do something similar with that. So it's the emotional connection, it's the customer-centric emotional connection that's going to make people, inform people's buying choices with food. Now, the skeptics out there will say, how big is that actual market? How many people are genuinely really concerned about the food that they're buying and are actually going to put their hand in their pockets and make a different choice about that food depending on the story that's told with it? This is a really interesting survey that was released yesterday by NFF. They do it each year, looking at whether or not consumers care about where their food comes from. Now, 65% of all people don't care at all or are only somewhat interested in where the food comes from that they buy, according to this survey. And quite interestingly, nearly 23% of millennials, 18 to 29-year-olds, don't care at all about the food they buy. So again, the skeptics will look at that and go, what are we worried about it for? You know, there's still only a small proportion of people that are actually going to make purchasing decisions at the end of the day that are based on all of that. But the reality is that they're still going to buy food, and they're still going to walk into a supermarket to buy food, and they're still going to make a choice about the supermarket that they go into to buy food. And those supermarkets are going to make choices about how they market to everyone to get them in the front door. Now, when people get in the front door, they may not make a, you know, they may just go to the cheapest product or not be so concerned about the emotional story. But what's going to get them in that supermarket versus another supermarket, and we see it all the time with the marketing campaigns, are what supermarkets anticipate consumer stories are and what consumers will relate to. So again, the emotional connection and the data that goes along with that to demonstrate that emotional connection is really important and is going to determine where people shop and how people shop. The other really big thing, and why I'm sort of focusing on this bit about the supermarkets as well, and the supermarkets driving that emotional connection as much as the individual consumers are as well, is because it's really important to understand who's going to drive implementation of data platforms in relation to how organisations like MLA and integrity systems work with producers. How it all comes back at the end of the day to what you experience on farm and how that data eventually ends up being connected with a product that's bought in a supermarket. Because I think a lot of the story to this point has sort of inadvertently made the connection that it's going to be quite a direct interaction between farmers and consumers. But I think more realistically, it's actually going to be much more driven by global food companies and supermarkets anticipating what consumers want, either through marketing campaigns to get them in the door, or probably most importantly, keeping people alive. Because really the ultimate consumer experience is not dying. And increasingly, food safety and food traceability are, you know, company-destroying issues that data platforms and digital systems are helping to solve. So recently there's been an ongoing case in the US around romaine lettuce. Many of you might have seen. It's now, this current case affected 32 people in 11 states, started on October the 8th. So nearly 2 months in, and they still haven't got a definitive source of where that lettuce is coming from. And more alarmingly, that's the second time it's happened this year. Earlier in the year, outbreak started in March. 2 months later, still no definitive source. By that stage, 132 people were ill and one person had died, unfortunately. So, you know, that is driving a really urgent look into digital traceability systems, blockchain, you know, anything that these really significant companies and global food companies, what they can do to basically be able to trace food and keep people alive. So that sort of macro level need for data, either to get people in the shop in the first place or to be able to provide the trust. Again, you know, Michelle talked about trust. Trust is the issue of 2018. The trust that you can buy safe food is really what's going to drive digital platforms in the food industry all the way back to the farmer. So what's that going to look like? And how are you going to experience that as a producer? So we're already seeing it. Supermarket-driven certification schemes to meet some of their marketing platforms. The Gray's grass-fed program, which I'm sure most of you would be aware of by now. That is going to be the evidence that that provides the trust that what you're buying is either meeting an emotional story or is safe. But the process of doing that at this stage is painful, manual, cumbersome. You look at what Coles provides you to help you with that process. Record. We've already heard today about, you know, the 50 apps being combined to get the information that you need to do anything, and that's just from a productivity point of view, let alone then having to meet a certification program to participate, basically to access a market, the price of participation in the market. So what we really want to get to is this sort of thing here, and again we've heard about it this morning, the dashboard concept, the idea that we are now having the capability, the real capability to monitor, record, analyse everything digitally, but we need to connect all that information. We need to get all that information into one spot to derive further insight and to meet requirements to participate in markets and provide assurances around food safety, and then also to connect that, eventually an emotional message or something that goes with it to be able to sell the product as well. Now, we've seen today already, you know, there's been huge advances in this sort of dashboard idea or data accumulation platforms, and you know we've seen some companies demonstrating how far they've got with that today. The focus still, or at least what we're seeing today, is still at the productivity end, and I'm suggesting really that in terms of, again, where the dollar's going to come from, the only person that's putting the dollar into the value chain is the consumer, and that means that the real drivers, the real money in where these the implementation of these platforms are going to come are more from the big supermarket companies and the global food companies, as well as the productivity part of this, dashboard part of this. We also need to start bringing that whole value chain in. Now, is that pie in the sky? Is that sort of getting too hard to expect that really, as well as having all that productivity information on farm, we're also going to start including value chain data all the way through the value chain and consumer data as well? Now, it's completely technically feasible, and you've only got to look at other parts of the economy to see that it's already happening. This is a platform called Zapier, which connects consumer data apps. So anything that's in the cloud, thousands of apps, literally. If you've got an app that is putting data in the cloud, this platform will basically connect apps in whatever way you want to. There's you know, thousands of pre-existing connections on there, but you can get on there and make your own, or you can get other people to make them for you. That's just one example of linking 2 apps, 0 with Gmail, but you can link 3 or 4 or 5 in a chain if you want to. So it's not, it's happening. It's out there in the economy, happening already, that all these different cloud-based data sources are getting linked to pull disparate sources of data together and make it work, which is what we need in agriculture and in red meat industry to happen. Now, this is just happening. I mean, there's a little bit of coordination and sort of regulatory aspects around this, setting standards and this sort of thing, but mostly this is just the market working with Zapier and those sorts of products, because consumer cloud-based data products are used by tens of millions of people. It's a massive market, there's heaps of money involved, there is a market to make it happen. The red meat industry is tens of thousands of people. The market is nowhere nearly as big. And so the idea that this sort of approach is just going to happen, I think, is a brave call. And I think this is where it's really, really important that organisations like MLA and Integrity Systems Company have a massive role to play in facilitating the development of this sort of approach to data, and Sean has already talked about it this morning in being completely unapologetic in the approach they've taken today to make sure that everyone that participated shared data, contributed data, and started to test this idea of the dashboards. Get beyond the hype and make sure that it's actually happening. And if then they continue to do that, we'll get to the stage where, and these are actually real terms, data lakes and data swamps, for anyone that works sort of in big data. A data lake is a system or a repository of data where data is stored in its natural format. It can be any sort of enterprise data. It can be raw, transformed, structured, unstructured. But critically, it is all stored in a way that enables reporting, visualization, analytics, and machine learning. A data swamp is a deteriorated data lake that is inaccessible, is either inaccessible or its intended use is providing little value. Now, MLA and ISC, their role is making sure that we end up with a data lake and not a data swamp. And I think they're doing that really well so far, and it's going to take continued effort to do it. And the ending up with a data lake is going to mean that the industry continues to move forward with the ability to have true whole of value chain data flowing up and down, providing the ability to attach evidence-based, trustworthy, emotional stories to food to sell them, to also provide the safety and surety that it's actually not going to kill you, but most importantly for the people in this room, using that very same data that is actually helping you with productivity implications and decisions so that you're actually still improving your businesses and making a profit. Thanks, that's all I got.